We have David from North Carolina wanting to talk to us. David, you're on the line.
Hello. I want to say first solidarity to the first caller because I feel anger over circumcision as well. But I really called in to talk about the guilt that religion gave me about losing my virginity before marriage. I lost my religion about the age of 15 and lost my virginity about the age of 19, and I still felt guilty and felt like I was going to hell. So it doesn't disappear very quickly sometimes.
How did that affect you?
Well, I got over it a few years later, but for the relationship that I was in, it kind of made things difficult because I didn't really feel comfortable having sex all that much with the woman that I was with because I felt guilty almost every time I did it. So she was also a virgin when we lost our virginity to each other. So,
So was she experiencing the same sort of thing?
I didn't ask, but I kind of think so. But I had the unfortunate experience of just crying that first night. We didn't share a room; we were in college, but yeah, it was quite odd that even that many years after losing my religion, losing my virginity was kind of a big deal because of the guilt. And it was all based in, I thought I was going to go to hell still. Even though I didn't believe in a God and I didn't believe in Satan at that time, I still believed that I might go to hell. And that was a horrible feeling. I don't know why people push that on their kids.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful force. Just classical conditioning and the associations that our bodies can make when we kind of pair our sexuality or specifically the experience of orgasm with incredible amounts of shame and guilt. That can form a bit of a connection, and it can take a really long time to get past that, particularly if you are growing up and you are told not to masturbate and you shouldn't masturbate and you definitely shouldn't masturbate, but also you are 12, 13, 14, 15 years old and you're gonna masturbate. And then you do. And all of a sudden, after that like rush of excitement and hormones and everything else has faded, you're left with this incredible amount of shame and guilt. And our bodies can begin to really associate the two and believe that our sexuality writ large under any circumstances is wrong. Because even if we're able to convince ourselves and even if we're able to believe that, oh, okay, in the context of marriage or whatever else, this is somehow okay, our bodies don't know that. You know, they're not keyed in. Our bodies aren't reading the Bible in the same ways that we are. And so I imagine that traumatic experience is something that has lingered in your body in a lot of ways. How have you managed to walk away from that experience or from that feeling?
Well, when I came to the realization that hell was not likely to exist a couple of years later, I'm now 45, so I've grown a bit since then. But it was just getting past the point of thinking about hell as something that could be real. That got me past any guilt I felt about it. And, I've enjoyed sex thoroughly since.
Glad to hear it.
And it's, yeah. And I've had the pleasure of coming out to my folks about 3 different things. My sexuality, or pansexual, my atheism, and my BDSM stuff.
Ah, the hat trick. So, congratulations. Very few people hit the Triple Crown, so congratulations, and not to be too glib about it, because I'm sorry that you've had those experiences. I mean, that sounds like a miserable pain, and I stand with you in kind of wondering, like, how did we get here? How did we normalize this to this extent, even after all of the signs? Even after our bodies were screaming no and we kept going, just as a society, we have really, I mean, to say that we deified it would be very literal and accurate. We have taken these ideas and made them more important than human beings. And that is a terrible sadness.
Yeah. And I felt terribly guilty and cried often when I did have masturbation sessions before losing my virginity, because I was still religious at the time. I was in my early teens when that started, and I was still Christian at that point. And I confessed to it, as Nate was saying, in church. Luckily, my folks didn't go to that church. I was the only one in the family going to church at that point. But it was rather embarrassing to do so. And then I found out later that the pastor was cheating with about 3 members of the congregation on his wife. So that kind of made me feel better. The doctrines that are taught within the churches is just, for lack of a better word, abuse.
Mm-hmm. That word feels pretty appropriate here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you on abuse. Yep.
Yeah. And for me, as I said, getting past it simply came with the realization that hell wasn't likely to exist. So for anybody out there who's listening, if you get to that point, you may just find that the guilt disappears. But it was that point for me.
Sure. That's, and even beyond that, right? I'm glad that you were eventually able to move beyond your fear of hell. But one of the things, like, I've had this come up in RfR too, is people feeling shame for masturbation or premarital sex. And one of the things that can help, after you deal with the feelings, you have to deal with what they're feeling first. But once you can get past that a little bit and start to sort of examine, well, what are these rules, right? What does the Bible say about marriage, right? The only messages about premarital sex that we have really come from the letters of Paul. And what else did Paul say? Paul also told slaves to obey their masters and told women to be silent in churches, and that they shouldn't have authority over men. So fuck Paul. I don't really care what Paul thinks, right? And if you want to go back to the Old Testament, we're talking rape as a property crime. We're talking, marriage between a prisoner of war and their conqueror. Like, these are, if you're going to go by this awful book as your standard of rules, you can't just pick the ones that suit what you want to be true, right? You can't just pick and choose. It's either all right or it's all bullshit, and it's clearly not all right.
And unfortunately, it does get picked for the parts that they like.
Absolutely, it
several
does.
denominations.
Well, once you start to sort of pick that apart, and I'm glad that you did, David. I'm glad you were able to pick that apart. But once you do start to kind of pick that apart, the rest of it sort of falls like a bunch of dominoes. So I'm glad you called in to help some other people sort of develop some of those coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If I hadn't gotten to the point where I couldn't believe that hell wasn't likely, I probably still would feel guilty, or at least some little tinge of fear.
Sure.
But it's it's
Pascal's wager makes sense up until the point where you realize it really doesn't. But it's pretty terrifying on its face, and it does take a little bit of introspection, which is very much against the rules. So you're having to really go out on a limb in order to get to that point, and we're so glad that you did, and that you gave us a call to help share some of that story with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the call, and hope you guys have a good
Really
night.
appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. You too.
All right.